Welcome back to Tales from the Darkness, where the line between the real world and the unknown blurs. Tonight, I'm sharing with you 3 stories that will make you question what you thought you knew about the world around us. These stories will take you through hospitals, quiet neighborhoods, and secluded cabins, and leave you wondering if the things we see in the dark are just our imagination or something far more sinister. The clock on the hospital wall ticked past midnight, marking the beginning of my night shift. I'd grown used to the hollow quiet that set in once visiting hours ended, and the bustling energy of the day faded into silence. Working the night shift was never easy, but tonight, something felt different, a thickness in the air that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I worked in an older wing of the hospital, where the fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting unsettling shadows down the corridors. The sounds of the heart monitors, the hum of the air conditioning, and the occasional squeak of a gurney wheel were the only company I had. But tonight, these sounds felt distorted, as if they were warping around me. At around 3 a.m., I got a call to check on room 5512. Mr. Gregory, a long-term patient in his 80s, had been in critical condition for weeks. The doctors said he was slipping away and wouldn't make it through the night. I didn't know Mr. Gregory well, but I knew enough. He had no family visiting, no friends to check on him, just a solitary man waiting for his time to come. When I entered his room, a wave of dread washed over me. The air was thick, stale, and there was a scent, a faint but unmistakable smell of decay. Mr. Gregory lay in his bed, his skin as pale as the sheets, his breathing shallow. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling, yet there was a strange intensity in them, as if he were watching something no one else could see. I stepped closer, trying to keep my composure as I checked his pulse. His heartbeat was faint but steady, and his breathing continued its shallow rhythm. But there was something else, a faint whisper, barely audible. I leaned in, thinking he might be trying to speak, but his lips were still. The whisper grew louder, an eerie murmur that seemed to echo in the corners of the room. My heart began to race and I glanced around, half expecting to see someone else hiding in the shadows. But we were alone. The whisper grew louder, and I could finally make out the words, "Help me." Chilled to the bone, I backed away, unsure of what I was hearing. His mouth hadn't moved, yet the voice continued, desperate and pleading. I checked the hallway, hoping to find another nurse or orderly, but it was empty. When I turned back, his hand had shifted, now hanging over the edge of the bed, his fingers curled as if reaching for something. A gust of cold air rushed past me, and the lights flickered violently. Suddenly, the machines in his room went haywire. The heart monitor's rhythm sped up, beeping frantically, even though I could see his chest rising and falling at the same shallow pace. I panicked, grabbing the phone to call for help, but as I dialed, a shadow crossed my vision. When I looked up, Mr. Gregory's face was turned toward me, his eyes wide and filled with an expression of absolute terror. His mouth twisted into a grimace, as if he was trying to scream but couldn't. His hand moved again, this time with force, grabbing my wrist. His skin was ice cold, and the grip was far too strong for a man of his frailty. His voice came louder now, as if he was speaking directly into my ear. "They're coming. They're coming for me. Don't let them take me." And just like that, the room grew quiet. Mr. Gregory's hand fell limp, and his heart monitor displayed a flat line. I stood there, frozen in place, trying to comprehend what I had just witnessed. Moments later, other staff rushed in, alerted by the alarm. But by the time they arrived, Mr. Gregory was gone, his body taken away, and his room eerily silent. The next night I was working again, feeling shaken and exhausted. I walked by room 5512, now dark and empty, and a chill ran down my spine. The door was slightly ajar, and as I passed, I caught a glimpse of something inside. Mr. Gregory, sitting up in bed, his eyes fixed on me with that same terrified expression. I blinked, and he was gone, but his voice lingered, a faint whisper in my ear. "Help me." I had been looking forward to a quiet weekend alone. My boyfriend was away on a business trip, and the thought of having the whole house to myself was a rare treat. Our house was nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood, surrounded by trees and a sprawling backyard that I'd always found comforting. But that night, the house felt different. It was too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. At around 10 p.m., I curled up on the couch with a bowl of popcorn, watching an old horror movie. The sound of the wind outside rattled the windows, and I could hear the trees scraping against the house with each gust. I tried to relax, but a nagging feeling of unease gnawed at me. The doorbell rang. I froze, the sudden sound jolting me out of my thoughts. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated, debating whether to answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I peered through the peephole, but there was no one there, just the empty porch illuminated by the dim light. I shrugged it off, assuming it was just a prank. But then, the doorbell rang again, louder this time, more insistent. I checked the peephole once more, but there was still no one outside. I started to feel the hairs on the back of my neck prick up, a feeling I couldn't shake. I double-checked the locks and returned to the couch, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. An hour later, I was dozing off when a loud knock shattered the silence. My heart raced as I sat up, my eyes darting toward the front door. The knocking continued, steady and forceful. I picked up my phone to call my boyfriend, but his line went straight to voicemail. I tried calling a friend, but there was no answer. I walked slowly toward the door, my heart pounding. The knocking had stopped, but I felt a presence on the other side. I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath, and heard a faint, raspy whisper. "I can see you." I stumbled back, feeling my stomach drop. The whisper echoed in my mind, taunting me. I rushed to check the windows, making sure every lock was secure. As I moved through the house, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shadow, moving slowly past one of the windows, as if circling the house. I ducked down, trying to stay out of sight. My hands were shaking as I peered through a small gap in the curtains, my eyes straining to see who, or what, was outside. The shadow was gone, but the unease lingered. I backed away, my mind racing, when the knocking started again. Louder, more urgent. The whisper returned, chilling and clear. "Let me in." I backed away from the door, terrified. I didn't dare open it. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the police. They arrived within minutes, but by the time they searched the area, there was no trace of anyone. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. Nothing. When the officers left, I felt a momentary sense of relief, but as I closed the door and turned around, I saw it. A message, scrawled in smeared ink on the wall, right beside the door. "I'll be back." When my friends and I rented the cabin deep in the woods, we thought it would be a fun, adventurous escape from our city lives. The cabin was tucked away, surrounded by trees that stretched high into the sky, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. It was perfect. No cell service, no internet, just us and nature. The first night was peaceful. We spent it around a campfire, sharing stories and laughing. But as darkness settled over the woods, an eerie quiet fell. The crackling of the fire seemed to be the only sound, and it was as if the forest was listening, holding its breath. As the night wore on, I began to feel like we weren't alone. Shadows moved between the trees, too swift to be animals, too large to be any creature I recognized. I brushed it off, blaming my imagination, but the feeling persisted. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I caught glimpses of something moving, lurking just out of sight. On the second night, we decided to take a walk. The moonlight barely pierced the dense forest canopy, and we used our flashlights to navigate the winding paths. But as we ventured deeper, the forest grew darker, the air colder. We heard rustling around us, the sound of footsteps trailing our own, but whenever we turned to look, there was nothing. Then, we saw it. A figure standing between the trees, half hidden in shadow. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs unnaturally long, and its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. It watched us in silence, unmoving, yet somehow aware. We froze, paralyzed with fear, as it slowly lifted an arm, pointing in our direction. Without a word, we turned and ran, stumbling through the forest, our flashlights flickering as if they were being drained by the darkness itself. I could feel it behind us, its presence heavy and suffocating, as if it were reaching out, ready to drag us into the shadows. On the second night, we decided to take a walk. The moonlight barely pierced the dense forest canopy, and we used our flashlights to navigate the winding paths. But as we ventured deeper, the forest grew darker, the air colder. We heard rustling around us, the sound of footsteps trailing our own, but whenever we turned to look, there was nothing. Then, we saw it. A figure standing between the trees, half hidden in shadow. It was tall, impossibly tall, its limbs unnaturally long, and its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. It watched us in silence, unmoving, yet somehow aware. We froze, paralyzed with fear, as it slowly lifted an arm, pointing in our direction. Without a word, we turned and ran, stumbling through the forest, our flashlights flickering as if they were being drained by the darkness itself. I could feel it behind us, its presence heavy and suffocating, as if it were reaching out, ready to drag us into the shadows. When we finally reached the cabin, we slammed the door shut, bolting every lock, but the silence outside was deafening, and as we peeked out the window, we saw it, standing just beyond the tree line, watching, waiting. That night, none of us slept. We sat huddled together, listening to the sound of footsteps circling the cabin, and the faint, haunting whisper of our names being called. When dawn finally broke, the footsteps stopped, but the feeling of dread lingered. We left the cabin that morning, and none of us have ever spoken of that night again. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I feel that presence, watching me, waiting, just beyond the edge of the light. 3 stories of unexplained terror, each one different, but they share a common thread. Something out there, just beyond our vision, watching, waiting. The question is it real, or just our minds playing tricks on us? Thanks for joining me tonight on Tales from the Darkness. If these stories gave you chills, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends, because you never know when the next strange encounter could happen. And if you have your own terrifying tale, drop it in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and keep watching the shadows.